When the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés first encountered the remnants of Mayan civilization in the Yucatán Peninsula during the early 1522, he was struck by something unexpected. Among the ruins and living communities, he found not chaos or barbarism, but intricate systems of governance that had maintained social order across centuries. The Mayan approach to justice wasn't merely about punishment. It was a sacred act that connected the earthly realm to the cosmos itself, where every crime represented a tear in the fabric of universal harmony that had to be carefully mended. His lieutenant, Bernal Díaz del Castillo, would later write in his chronicle that the Maya possessed laws and customs as good as our own, a remarkable admission from a conquistador more accustomed to dismissing indigenous practices. In the coastal city of Tulum, Spanish observers witnessed local officials settling a dispute over fishing rights with such elaborate ceremony and careful deliberation that it resembled a religious ritual as much as a legal proceeding. At the heart of Mayan political power stood the Ajor, the divine king who ruled each city-state as both temporal leader and spiritual intermediary. In cities like Tikal, Palenque, and Copan, the Ajah wasn't simply a monarch in the European sense. He was considered a living conduit between the gods and humanity. His blood was believed to carry divine essence, making him uniquely qualified to interpret the will of the gods and dispense justice accordingly. When Keinich Yanab Pakal ascended to the throne of Palenque in 615 CE at the tender age of 12, he inherited not just political authority, but the awesome responsibility of maintaining cosmic balance through righteous judgment. Pakal's reign, which would last an extraordinary 68 years until his death in 683 CE, became legendary, partly because of his reputation for fair adjudication. Hieroglyphic inscriptions in temple exaims at Palenque describe how the young king settled a bitter succession dispute between two noble houses in his second year of rule. Demonstrating wisdom that supposedly exceeded his years, a sign, his scribes insisted, of divine guidance. The famous tablet of the slaves from Palenque depicts Pakal receiving tribute and supplicants, his feet resting on the backs of captives, a visual reminder that the king's justice extended from rewarding the loyal to punishing the rebellious. The Ajah's court was a theater of divine authority. Seated on elevated platforms adorned with jade and quetzal feathers, surrounded by scribes who recorded every decision in their intricate hieroglyphic script, the king would hear cases that threatened the social order. His judgments weren't based on personal whim, but on his perceived ability to channel divine wisdom. Archaeological evidence from sites like Yaxchilan shows elaborate throne rooms where stelae depict rulers performing bloodletting rituals before major judicial decisions, a practice that supposedly sharpened their connection to the supernatural realm and ensured their verdicts aligned with cosmic law. Lintel 24, from Yaxchilan, one of the most famous Mayan artworks, shows Lady Cabal-Juk performing a bloodletting ritual around 709 CE, passing a rope studded with thorns through her tongue, while her husband, Shield Jaguar II, looks on. This wasn't mere religious devotion, but preparation for receiving divine insight into matters of state and justice. The vision serpent that emerges in the accompanying scene represents the moment when the supernatural realm became accessible, allowing the rulers to see truth obscured from ordinary mortals. At Piedras Negras, Stela 14 records how Ruler 4 consulted with the gods through bloodletting before passing judgment on nobles accused of conspiring with the rival city of Yaxchilan in 749 CE, a case of treason that required divine confirmation, before severe punishments could be enacted. Yet the Mayan world wasn't a simple autocracy where one man's word determined all fates. The reality was far more nuanced, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of governance that distributed judicial authority across multiple layers of society. While the Ajor served as the ultimate arbiter, particularly in cases involving high nobles, matters of state, or religious transgressions, the vast majority of disputes never reached the royal throne. Instead, they were resolved by a network of community elders and noble councils who formed the backbone of Mayan legal administration. In the commercial hub of Calakmul, where merchants from across Mesoamerica converged to trade cacao, obsidian, and jade. Local magistrates handled dozens of disputes daily over weights, measures, and contract violations. Recent excavations have uncovered what archaeologists believe was a marketplace tribunal building, complete with stone benches arranged in a semicircle suggesting formal proceedings where both parties could present their cases before a panel of judges. In rural communities and urban neighborhoods alike, respected elders known as kuhun, literally worshippers or keepers of the days, would convene to settle disputes between families over land boundaries, marriage arrangements, or commercial disagreements. These weren't informal mediations but structured proceedings where testimony was heard, evidence examined, and decisions rendered based on customary law passed down through generations. Spanish chronicler Diego de Landa, writing in the 1560 seconds after witnessing the remnants of these traditions among the Yucatec Maya, noted with some surprise that these elder councils operated with great prudence and justice, often achieving resolutions that satisfied all parties without requiring escalation to higher authorities. De Landa described observing a case in the town of Mani, where elders resolved a heated dispute between two farmers over an allegedly stolen pig. The accused farmer brought forward 3 witnesses who testified to seeing the pig in his possession before the alleged theft occurred, while the accuser could provide no witnesses. The elders ruled in favor of the accused, but required him to gift the accuser a young piglet to restore friendship and peace between neighbors. This emphasis on reconciliation rather than vindication struck de Landa as remarkably practical. Another Spanish observer, Friar Diego de Cogoludo, noted in his 1688 History of Yucatan that these elder councils sometimes took days to reach decisions, carefully weighing testimony and consulting precedents that lived only in oral tradition, passed from one generation of kuhun to the next. The noble councils, or popol na, represented another tier of judicial authority. Composed of high-ranking nobles from prominent lineages, these bodies handled more complex cases involving multiple families, commercial contracts, or disputes that crossed community boundaries. Archaeological excavations at Chronicle have uncovered hieroglyphic bench panels describing how the local popol na adjudicated a territorial dispute between 2 subordinate villages in 652 CE, demonstrating the council's authority to make binding decisions that affected entire communities. The bench panels detail how representatives from each village presented their claims, supported by landmarkers and testimony from elderly witnesses who remembered where boundaries had stood for generations. The council ruled that a particular stream would serve as the permanent boundary and ordered the construction of stone markers at regular intervals to prevent future confusion. Interestingly, both villages were required to contribute labor and resources to building these markers, a clever solution that gave each community investment in maintaining the peace. At Copan, hieroglyphic stairway inscriptions reference a popol na meeting in 738 CE that had to adjudicate an accusation of fraud involving a merchant who had sold fake cacao beans, seeds hollowed out and filled with dirt, to increase their weight. The council's decision to require full restitution plus an additional 50% penalty became a precedent cited in later commercial disputes. What unified all these judicial bodies, from village elders to the divine king himself, was a shared conception of justice that modern observers might find alien. To the Maya, crime wasn't simply an offense against an individual or even against society. It was a disruption of the cosmic order that the gods had established at creation. This worldview permeated Mayan sacred texts, particularly the Popol Vuh, the Quiché Maya creation narrative that survived the Spanish conquest and provides invaluable insights into Mayan moral philosophy. The text, preserved by a Quiché nobleman in the 1550 seconds, using the Latin alphabet to transcribe the ancient story, opens with the gods creating the world through speech, literally speaking reality into existence. This act of divine ordering established the fundamental template that human society was meant to follow. The Popol Vuh doesn't read like a legal code in the Hammurabian sense, with specific crimes matched to specific punishments. Instead, It presents justice as fundamentally about maintaining balance and humility before the divine. The text recounts how the gods destroyed previous creations, wooden people who showed no reverence, boastful ball players who challenged divine authority because they upset the cosmic equilibrium. This theme of balance echoed through Mayan legal thinking. A thief didn't just steal property, he introduced imbalance into the community, taking what the gods had allocated to another. An adulterer didn't merely betray a spouse. She violated the sacred marriage bonds that mirrored divine partnerships and maintained social stability. The twin heroes Hunahpu and Xbalanque, central figures in the Popol Vuh, demonstrate proper behavior by showing respect to their elders, keeping their promises, and maintaining reciprocal relationships, lessons that extended directly into judicial thinking. When they defeat the lords of Xibalba, the underworld, they do so not through brute force but by outsmarting them and restoring proper order, showing that justice requires wisdom and balance rather than mere punishment. One passage describes how the twins put in order all that was confused, a phrase that Mayan judges might have recognized as describing their own sacred function. The Dresden Codex and Madrid Codex, though primarily concerned with astronomy and ritual, contain scattered references to moral offenses that reveal this cosmic dimension of Mayan justice. Passages warn against those who lie in the market and those who diminish the measures, suggesting that commercial dishonesty wasn't just bad business, but a form of cosmic disorder that could attract divine patupal, displeasure. The calendrical systems that tracked auspicious and inauspicious days for various activities also influenced when justice could be properly administered. Certain days were considered favorable for resolving disputes and rendering judgments, while others were deemed inappropriate for such weighty matters. The Dresden Codex contains elaborate tables showing which days were governed by which deities, and a judge might refuse to hear a case involving theft on a day ruled by Apuch, the death god, fearing that any judgment rendered under such inauspicious circumstances might be tainted or bring misfortune. In the Madrid Codex, there are references to ritual purification required after handling certain types of cases, particularly those involving violence or moral transgressions, suggesting that justice itself could spiritually contaminate those who administered it if proper precautions weren't observed. Archaeological evidence from ritual deposits at Tikal shows that judges or officials periodically made offerings of copal incense and ceramic censers, possibly to cleanse themselves after difficult judicial proceedings. This religious foundation of justice created a system where punishment served not primarily as deterrence or retribution, but as restoration. When a person committed a crime, they created a debt not just to their victim, but to the entire community, and, ultimately, to the cosmos itself. Justice required rebalancing the scales through acts of restitution, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, or, in severe cases, removal of the offender from the social body entirely. At Sable, excavations have uncovered a public plaza where stelae depict what appears to be a ceremony of public acknowledgement, a wrongdoer kneeling before community members, possibly performing a mandated act of contrition. The hieroglyphic text mentions restoring what was taken from the center, a poetic way of describing how crime disrupted the community's spiritual center and how justice aimed to repair that rupture. Yet for all its cosmic pretensions, Mayan justice remained deeply stratified by social class, reflecting the rigid hierarchies that structured their civilization. The same crime committed by a noble and a commoner could result in dramatically different consequences. When a nobleman from Tikal was caught in an adulterous affair in the late 7th century, hieroglyphic texts suggest he faced public humiliation and substantial property penalties, but retained his status and life. A commoner accused of the same offense might face physical mutilation or even death, particularly if the affair involved a noblewoman and thus threatened the purity of elite bloodlines. The Bonampak murals, painted around 790 CE, provide vivid evidence of this class-based justice system. In one scene, noble captives from a defeated city are shown being presented to the victorious king. With apparent dignity, they wear fine clothing and retain their jewelry, suggesting they would be ransomed or incorporated into the winning city's nobility. In contrast, commoner prisoners appear partially unclothed and mistreated, their fate already sealed as sacrificial victims or permanent slaves. This visual representation perfectly captures the dual nature of Mayan justice, sophisticated and measured for the elite, brutal and swift for the lowly. Warriors occupied an interesting middle position in this social hierarchy. The capture of enemies in battle brought prestige and economic rewards, but warriors who committed crimes during peacetime often faced harsher treatment than typical commoners. Their training and discipline meant they were held to higher standards, and their crimes were seen as more deliberate violations of social order. A warrior who stole from his own community, for instance, had betrayed not just an individual, but his sacred obligation to protect rather than prey upon his people. At Dos Pilas, inscriptions describe how a warrior named Six Sky, who had distinguished himself in battles against Sable, was executed in 735 CE for murdering a merchant during a drunken dispute. The text emphasizes that his military honors could not excuse his violation of the peace, the very peace he had fought to establish. His execution, carried out in the same plaza where he had once been honored for his battlefield prowess, served as a powerful message that no one stood above cosmic law. The famous Bonampak battle scene also shows warriors engaged in ritual preparation before combat, overseen by priests who blessed their weapons and confirmed that the upcoming battle, aligned with divine will warfare itself, was subject to cosmic justice, legitimate only when properly sanctioned by the gods. Slaves, whether debt slaves, war captives, or criminals reduced to servitude, existed largely outside the normal protections of Mayan law. While some evidence suggests that slaves couldn't be killed arbitrarily by their owners, this would waste valuable property and potentially anger the gods, they had little recourse against abuse and faced the harshest punishments for offenses against free persons. A slave who struck a free person, even in self-defense, risked immediate execution, while a free person who killed a slave might only need to compensate the owner for lost labor. De Landa recorded a chilling anecdote about a slave in the town of Sotuta who had been beaten by his master for alleged laziness. When the slave defended himself, striking the master's arm, he was immediately seized by neighbors and brought before local authorities. Within hours, without any formal hearing, he was stoned to death in the marketplace as a warning to other slaves. Yet the same chronicle mentions that debt slaves, free people who had sold themselves or family members into temporary servitude to pay off obligations, retained certain protections. They could not be resold without consent, their children remained free, and they could work off their debt through labor. This distinction reveals how Mayan justice recognized gradations even within the unfree population, treating war captives and criminal slaves as fundamentally different from debt slaves who had entered servitude through legitimate economic transactions. This complex interweaving of political authority, religious belief, and social hierarchy created a justice system that was simultaneously sophisticated and profoundly unequal. The Ajar sat atop this pyramid as divine judge, but the daily reality of justice involved countless community elders, noble councils, and customary mediations that kept Mayan society functioning across the centuries. Understanding this foundation is essential to grasping why Mayan punishments took the forms they did, not as random acts of cruelty, but as carefully calibrated responses designed to maintain the delicate balance between the human and divine realms. In the great city of Uxmal, whose Pyramid of the Magician still dominates the landscape, inscriptions speak of justice as the breath of the gods, moving through human words, a poetic recognition that every judgment, every punishment, every act of restitution was meant to channel divine will into earthly reality, keeping the cosmos in balance, one decision at a time. The marketplace at Calakmul fell silent on a sweltering afternoon in 692 CE, when guards dragged a well-known merchant named Smoking Squirrel into the central plaza. His crime was theft, not of gold or jade, but something far more precious in the Mayan economy: cacao beans, the currency that flowed through every transaction from slave purchases to tribute payments. But Smoking Squirrel hadn't simply stolen cacao. He had substituted hollowed beans filled with earth for genuine ones, deceiving dozens of traders over several months. As the crowd gathered, they understood they were about to witness not merely punishment but cosmic restoration, the rebalancing of an order this merchant had corrupted with his deception. What happened next would depend not just on what he had done, but who he was, who he had wronged, and whether the gods demanded his blood or merely his wealth. The plaza itself, located near Calakmul's structure 2, one of the largest pyramids in the Maya world, had witnessed countless such proceedings. The very stones beneath the merchant's feet had absorbed the blood of sacrifices and the tears of the condemned, making the space itself a threshold between the earthly and divine realms where justice took on cosmic significance. Theft occupied a peculiar place in Mayan criminal law because it revealed so much about a person's character and spiritual state. A man who stole food because his family was starving committed a different crime than one who stole to enrich himself, and both differed from someone like Smoking Squirrel, who employed deliberate deception. When Diego de Landa observed Mayan legal proceedings in the 16th century, he noted with fascination that judges inquired extensively into motive and circumstance before determining punishment. They examine the theft as physicians examine illness, Landa wrote, seeking not just the wound, but the corruption that caused it. A first-time thief caught stealing maize might be required to return twice what he took and perform public labor for the wronged party, working their fields, repairing their home, or serving them for a specified period. This principle of restitution aimed not to humiliate, but to restore what had been taken while reinforcing social bonds. At Copan, hieroglyphic texts describe a case from 715 CE where a young farmer stole turkeys from a neighbor's pen. The Council of Elders ordered him to return 4 turkeys for each one stolen and spend 30 days helping to rebuild the neighbor's damaged coop. The text specifically notes that after fulfilling this obligation, the 2 men shared balche together, the ceremonial honey-based drink that symbolized reconciliation and restored harmony. The stela recording this incident, found near Copan's famous hieroglyphic stairway, emphasizes that the young thief performed his service with good heart, suggesting that his attitude during restitution mattered as much as the material compensation itself. Archaeological evidence from the same period shows turkey bones in ritual deposits near residences, indicating the importance of these birds not just as food, but as valuable property whose theft disrupted household economies. But repeat offenders faced a darker fate. The Maya believed that someone who continued stealing despite making restitution had a corrupted spirit that threatened the community's cosmic balance. For such individuals, physical punishment became necessary not as revenge but as a visible sign that disorder had been purged. The Bonampak murals, though primarily depicting warfare, include background scenes of daily life, where one panel appears to show a man bound to a post while others strike him with sticks. Archaeologists debate the exact context, but the figure's lowered head and the presence of what might be stolen goods at his feet suggest this could represent punishment for theft. Mutilation served as a permanent mark of transgression for the most incorrigible thieves. A habitual thief might lose fingers, making it difficult to grasp and carry stolen items while simultaneously marking him publicly so that merchants and neighbors would watch him carefully. At Palenque, a carved bone found in the tomb of the Red Queen shows what appears to be a figure with damaged hands, possibly a reference to this practice, though interpretations vary. The choice of which fingers to remove held symbolic meaning. Thieves often lost their thumb and first 2 fingers on the dominant hand, the very digits essential for the pincer grip needed to grasp objects. This wasn't random cruelty, but calculated to make theft physically difficult while still allowing the person to perform basic labor and contribute to society. In Yucatan, Landa described witnessing the aftermath of such punishment in the town of Mani, where a notorious thief named Ah Kin worked as a water carrier despite his mutilated hand, a living reminder of the price of repeated transgression. He carried his shame in his hand for all to see, Landa wrote, yet the town permitted him to work and eat, for his punishment had made him honest. When theft involved deception, as with Smoking Squirrel's fraudulent cacao, The punishment escalated dramatically because the crime wasn't just material but spiritual. Lying perverted the sacred gift of speech that the gods had used to create the world, according to the Popol Vuh. A merchant who lied corrupted the marketplace itself, the social space where communities came together in trust. Spanish records from later periods describe how fraudulent merchants could be enslaved, their property distributed to their victims, and, in extreme cases, executed. The reasoning was clear. If restitution couldn't restore balance because the crime had poisoned social trust itself, then the offender had to be removed from the community entirely. At Tikal, excavations near the central marketplace have uncovered stone platforms archaeologists believe served as stages for public punishment ceremonies. One platform, dated to the late Classic period, bears faint traces of what might be bloodstains and shows wear patterns consistent with repeated binding of prisoners or criminals to its surface. Nearby residential compounds contain grinding stones with unusual markings that some scholars interpret as tallies, possibly records of compensation or restitution payments maintained by local authorities. The Madrid Codex contains an intriguing illustration showing a merchant figure with crossed-out eyes and mouth, which some epigraphers interpret as representing the spiritual blindness and corrupted speech of fraudulent traders, a visual metaphor for how such crimes destroyed the merchant's very essence as a trusted intermediary. Murder stood as perhaps the most straightforward crime requiring blood for blood, yet even here the Maya demonstrated remarkable nuance in their judicial thinking. An accidental killing during a hunting accident, or a death resulting from a fight where both parties had agreed to combat, faced different consequences than premeditated murder. Landa recorded that for accidental homicide, the killer's family might provide the victim's family with a replacement, typically a younger family member who would work for the bereaved household, essentially replacing the lost labor and social position of the deceased. This practice, which seems shocking to modern sensibilities, reflected the Mayan view that families, not individuals, formed the basic unit of society. The death created a hole in one family that needed filling, and justice meant restoration rather than retribution. In one documented case from the coastal town of Icab, a hunter's arrow went astray and killed a young man working in nearby fields. The hunter's family gave their teenage son to the deceased's family, where he worked for 7 years before being released with gifts that helped him establish his own household. Landa noted that the young man eventually married a daughter of the family he had served, fully integrating the two families and transforming tragedy into new kinship bonds. This wasn't forgiveness, but transformation, converting death's disorder into new social order. Premeditated murder, however, demanded the ultimate price. The killer faced execution, usually carried out in a manner that mirrored cosmic justice. At Tikal, Stela 31 includes glyphs that scholars interpret as describing the execution of a nobleman who had poisoned a rival in 457 CE. The execution took place during a public ceremony where the condemned man was bound and shot with arrows, a method that echoed the sacrifice of captives to the maize god and symbolically returned the murderer's corrupted life force to the divine realm. The choice of arrows rather than a swift beheading was deliberate. The slow death allowed time for prayers and rituals that would cleanse the community of the spiritual contamination the murder had introduced. Archaeological evidence from Copan's mass grave, dating to around 738 CE, shows several bodies with their hands bound and evidence of violent deaths, possibly criminals executed en masse during a period of social upheaval following the defeat and execution of the city's king, Uaxtlajan Uba Kawil, suggesting that times of crisis might have triggered waves of punitive executions to restore cosmic order. The famous altar Q at Copan, which depicts 16 successive rulers in an unbroken chain of legitimate succession, was commissioned partly to reassert cosmic order after this catastrophic break in royal continuity, when the king himself could be captured and beheaded by enemies from Quirigua. It suggested the entire universe had fallen into chaos that required drastic measures to restore. During such periods, crimes that might normally warrant lesser punishments could result in execution, as authorities sought to demonstrate that order was being forcefully reimposed. Friar Francisco de Asensio, traveling through the Petén region in 1696, recorded a local tradition about executions during troubled times. When the world turns upside down, they said, blood must flow freely to set it right again, and the gods care not whether it comes from enemies or criminals, only that it comes. Adultery occupied a uniquely complicated space in Mayan criminal law because it simultaneously involved property rights, social harmony, spiritual purity, and cosmic balance. When a married woman engaged in an affair, she didn't just betray her husband, she threatened the legitimacy of bloodlines, particularly crucial among the nobility where divine ancestry justified political power. A noblewoman's adultery could throw an entire succession into question. Did her children carry the sacred blood of her husband's lineage or the corrupted seed of another man? For this reason, adultery by noblewomen faced the harshest penalties. Landa described how an adulterous noblewoman might be stoned to death, her body left unburied as a warning, while her lover faced similar fate if he was of lower status. Yet if both parties were nobles of similar rank, the punishment sometimes shifted to permanent exile or forced temple service, removing them from society without completely destroying valuable elite bloodlines. At Yaxchilan, Lady Cabalchuk's prominence in official inscriptions and her performance of sacred bloodletting rituals suggests the immense importance placed on elite women's purity and legitimacy. Any suggestion of impropriety could destroy not just a woman but an entire political faction. The Temple of the Inscriptions at Palenque contains references to Kinich Janab Pakal's mother, Lady Sak Kuk, whose political power derived partly from her unquestioned lineage. Had her legitimacy been compromised by adultery, Pakal's entire reign would have lacked divine sanction. In this context, the severe punishment of noble adulteresses wasn't mere patriarchal control, but protection of the cosmic order that depended on pure bloodlines connecting earthly rulers to divine ancestors. Common women caught in adultery faced different consequences that reveal much about gender and class in Mayan justice. The husband held significant power to determine punishment, though community elders would intervene if his response seemed excessive. Landa noted cases where cuckolded husbands publicly humiliated their wives by cutting off their hair, a significant punishment in a culture where women's long hair symbolized fertility and feminine virtue. In other instances, the husband might divorce the wife, who would return to her family in disgrace, unlikely to remarry, and often forced into marginal economic positions. The male lover typically faced public beating and was required to provide compensation to the wronged husband, though usually not death, unless he had used force or the affair involved a woman of significantly higher status. Landa described a case in Sututa where a young man was discovered with a married woman. The husband demanded compensation of 20 mantles of cotton, a slave, and 3 loads of cacao, substantial wealth that nearly bankrupted the adulterer's family, but satisfied honor without requiring blood. The woman had her head shaved and was sent back to her father's house, where she worked grinding maize for her sisters-in-law, a degrading position for a woman who had once managed her own household. This economic and social degradation often proved more devastating than physical punishment. As the woman became a perpetual dependent, her marriage prospects destroyed and her children's status compromised. Male adultery by husbands received considerably less attention from the legal system, reflecting the patriarchal structure of Mayan society. A man could maintain multiple wives if his wealth allowed, and intimate relationships with women carried no legal penalty whatsoever. Only if a married man pursued another man's wife did the law intervene, and even then primarily to protect property rights rather than marital sanctity. This double standard pervaded Mayan justice, where the same act could be a capital crime or no crime at all depending on the gender and social status of those involved. The Popol Vuh itself reflects this imbalance. The hero twins' father, Hun Hunappu, fathers children with different women without moral condemnation, while the story emphasizes the importance of female chastity and proper marriage. Archaeological evidence from elite residences at Copan and Tikal shows separate women's quarters where multiple wives and concubines lived, suggesting polygyny was common among wealthy men, a practice that would have been impossible if male personal conduct had been legally enforced as strictly as female fidelity. Sacrilege, the violation of sacred spaces, objects, or rituals, struck at the very foundation of Mayan civilization. The gods maintained cosmic order, and anything that offended them risked catastrophic consequences for the entire community. When a young man in Quirigua was discovered stealing jade ornaments from a temple altar in 734 CE, the hieroglyphic record indicates he faced immediate execution by heart extraction, the most sacred form of sacrifice, usually reserved for honored captives. His death wasn't simply punishment, but necessary appeasement to prevent divine retribution against the city. The stela describing this incident emphasizes that the young man's heart was offered to the very deity he had offended, restoring the balance his theft had disrupted. Zumov P. at Quirigua, one of the most elaborate stone monuments in the Maya world, depicts cosmic creation and destruction, themes that would have provided the ceremonial backdrop for such executions, the criminal's death reenacting the primordial sacrifices that brought order from chaos. The jade he attempted to steal wasn't mere wealth, but sacred material believed to contain the essence of maize, water, and life itself. By stealing it, he hadn't just committed theft, but attempted to seize divine power, an act of hubris that demanded the ultimate response. Desecration of sacred caves, which the Maya believed were entrances to Xibalba, the underworld, met with similar severity. At Naj-Tunic, a cave system in Guatemala famous for its hieroglyphic inscriptions, one text warns against those who darken the mouth of the earth through improper behavior in these sacred spaces. Archaeological evidence suggests that individuals who violated cave sanctuaries might be sealed inside them alive. Effectively returning them to the underworld, they had defiled a punishment that was simultaneously execution and sacrificial offering. Excavations at Actun Tunikil Muknal cave in Belize have uncovered human remains in positions suggesting sacrifice, though distinguishing between honored offerings and punitive executions remains challenging. One skeleton, dubbed the Crystal Maiden, shows evidence of blunt force trauma, leading some archaeologists to speculate this might have been someone executed for cave desecration, their body left as an offering to appease the offended spirits of the underworld. The cave's stalactites and stalagmites, which the Maya saw as the petrified remains of ancient beings, created a natural cathedral where the boundary between life and death, punishment and sacrifice, became beautifully and terrifyingly blurred. Treason represented the ultimate crime against social order because it threatened not just individuals, but the entire political structure that kept chaos at bay. When a high nobleman at Dos Pilas conspired with the rival city of Tikal to overthrow his own king around 735 CE, the response was swift and brutal. Hieroglyphic Stairway 2 at Dos Pilas describes how the traitor and his immediate family were captured, paraded through the streets bound and stripped of their noble regalia, and then sacrificed during a major ceremony. The text emphasizes that their blood fed the earth and sky, transforming their treason into an offering that paradoxically strengthened the very cosmic order they had tried to destroy. Their property was confiscated, their names erased from family monuments, a form of spiritual death that outlasted their physical execution. In Mayan belief, being forgotten meant being truly erased from existence, unable to join the ancestors in the afterlife. At Piedras Negras, archaeologists have found stelae where certain figures have been deliberately defaced, their faces and name glyphs chiseled away, evidence of damnatio memoriae applied to traitors and defeated enemies whose very memory threatened political legitimacy. This practice reveals how Mayan punishment extended beyond the body into the realm of memory and history itself. The traitor's descendants for several generations might be barred from holding office or marrying into elite families, carrying the taint of their ancestors' betrayal like a hereditary curse. Ritual execution and human sacrifice occupied a space that modern observers often struggle to distinguish from criminal punishment, but the Maya saw clear differences. Sacrificial victims, especially high-ranking war captives, were honored offerings to the gods, their deaths sacred acts that sustained cosmic order. The elaborate ballgame depicted in murals and codices often culminated in the sacrifice of the losing team's captain, but this was ritualized violence that strengthened the universe, not punishment for wrongdoing. Criminal executions, by contrast, removed corrupted elements from society, though they often incorporated sacrificial elements to ensure the death served a restorative cosmic purpose. The Great Ball Court at Chichen Itza features panels showing decapitated ball players, blood flowing from their necks transforming into serpents and flowering vines, imagery suggesting that even deaths resulting from ritual sport could nourish the cosmos. Yet there's ongoing scholarly debate about whether losing players were actually sacrificed or whether this imagery represents mythological themes rather than historical practice. The famous murals at Bonampak, painted around 790 CE, illustrate this fusion of punishment and ritual in stunning detail. Room 2 shows the aftermath of a battle where captured enemies undergo torture and preparation for sacrifice. Some victims appear to be high-status warriors who will die honorable deaths, while others, identified by their plain dress and degraded postures, seem to be criminals or rebels who will face execution as punishment. The distinction lies in the ritual preparation. Honored sacrifices receive ceremonial attention, their bodies painted and adorned, while those being punished appear simply as bodies to be disposed of, though their deaths still occur in sacred space and time. One particularly haunting detail shows a captive pleading on his knees, his fingers splayed in supplication, while blood drips from his hands where his fingernails have been torn out, a torture that might have been applied to extract confessions or simply to degrade those whose crimes warranted such. Treatment. The central figure of Chanwan II, the king of Bonampak, presides over this scene wearing an elaborate jaguar costume, transforming himself into a divine predator whose judgment carries cosmic authority. His queen and other royal women watch from an elevated platform, their presence sanctifying the violence and confirming its necessity for maintaining order. The role of intent in determining punishment reveals sophisticated Mayan understanding of human psychology and moral responsibility. A man who killed accidentally while hunting carried different guilt than one who killed in anger, and both differed from a cold poisoner. The Dresden Codex contains passages that scholars interpret as discussing darkness of heart versus confusion of mind, essentially distinguishing between evil intent and tragic error. This distinction mattered because Mayan justice aimed to restore cosmic balance, and different types of disorder required different corrections. An evil heart needed to be cut out and offered to the gods. A confused mind might be corrected through ritual purification, public penance, or compensatory service. Page 3 of the Dresden Codex shows a sequence where divination rituals determine the nature of various afflictions and transgressions, suggesting that priests would perform such divinations to discern whether a criminal acted from inherent evil or temporary confusion. At Chronicle, inscriptions describe how a man who killed his brother during a drunken argument underwent a year-long purification process involving fasting, temple service, and ritual bloodletting before being reintegrated into society. His punishment aimed at spiritual correction rather than mere retribution. The text notes that he gave blood every 20 days during this period, the regular rhythm of the Mayan calendar suggesting his penance synchronized with cosmic time itself, gradually realigning his corrupted spirit with divine order. Gender profoundly shaped how justice was administered and experienced. Women generally faced harsher physical punishments for moral offenses while receiving somewhat more lenient treatment for property crimes, reflecting cultural assumptions about feminine nature and social roles. A woman who killed her husband faced almost certain execution, usually by burning a particularly horrifying death that the Maya associated with purification and transformation. The flames would consume her corrupted body while releasing her spirit for judgment by the gods. Yet a woman who stole food to feed her children might receive only a warning and community support, as such theft indicated broader social failure rather than individual moral corruption. Landa recorded a case in Mani where a widow stole maize from a communal storehouse to feed her 3 children after her husband's death left them destitute. Rather than punish her, the community elders redistributed resources to ensure her family's survival, recognizing that her crime reflected their own failure to care for vulnerable members. They said a mother who steals bread for her babies honors the maize goddess, not offends her, Landa wrote. revealing how Mayan justice could show remarkable compassion when circumstances justified transgression. Class distinctions remained absolute and unquestioned. When a nobleman at Palenque murdered a commoner in 668 CE, surviving texts suggest he paid substantial compensation to the victim's family and performed public penance at the temple, but retained his life, freedom, and status. Had the social positions been reversed, a commoner murdering a noble execution would have been immediate and certain, probably accompanied by the execution or enslavement of the killer's entire immediate family to prevent blood feuds and eliminate the corrupted lineage entirely. This brutal inequality reflected cosmic hierarchy, where the gods themselves occupied different ranks and powers. Just as humans couldn't question divine order, commoners couldn't challenge the prerogatives of nobles whose blood carried divine essence. The Temple XIM platform at Palenque contains a remarkable text describing how a nobleman named Chaksutzes accidentally killed a servant while demonstrating a new atlatl. The text notes that he gave cloth and cacao to the grieving ones and burned incense for 20 days, but suffered no further consequences. The servant's death was regrettable, but ultimately no more significant than breaking a valuable pot compensation restored balance without requiring noble blood. The spiritual contamination concept added another layer to Mayan punishment. Certain crimes, particularly those involving moral or personal misconduct, desecration of sacred objects, or practicing prohibited magic, were believed to spiritually pollute not just the criminal, but anyone who touched them or shared space with them. Such criminals faced not only physical punishment, but elaborate purification rituals. At Uxmal, archaeological evidence suggests that criminals guilty of spiritual crimes were isolated in special buildings before execution, preventing their contamination from spreading. Priests would perform cleansing ceremonies using copal incense, sacred water, and bloodletting to purify the execution site afterward, ensuring the criminal's death didn't leave lingering spiritual poison. The nunnery quadrangle at Uxmal, despite its Spanish colonial name, was likely an administrative complex that might have included spaces for isolating such criminals. Caches of copal incense burners and obsidian bloodletters found in these contexts suggest intensive purification activities. Some criminals were reportedly bathed in sacred water from cenotes before execution, washing away contamination so their deaths would serve as proper offerings rather than further polluting the sacred realm. This practice reveals how even in death, even for the most corrupted criminals, the Maya sought to extract cosmic value, transforming every execution into an opportunity to strengthen rather than merely cleanse the world. Public apologies and restitution ceremonies formed a crucial but often overlooked aspect of Mayan punishment. Not every crime required blood or mutilation. Many could be resolved through carefully orchestrated public acknowledgement of wrongdoing and material compensation. At Sable, a plaza stela depicts what appears to be such a ceremony, a kneeling figure presenting goods to a standing figure while community members witness. The accompanying glyphs mention words that repair the tear, suggesting this was a formal apology that restored social fabric. These ceremonies weren't simple PR exercises, but serious ritual events where the wrongdoer publicly acknowledged disturbing cosmic balance and took concrete steps to restore it, witnessed by both community and gods. The ceremony typically occurred during calendrically auspicious days determined by priests, ensuring divine attention and approval. At El Mirador, excavations have uncovered a platform with peculiar acoustic properties that amplify sound, leading archaeologists to speculate it served as a stage for public confessions and apologies. The wrongdoer's words literally amplified, so the entire community, and perhaps the gods themselves, could hear the acknowledgement of guilt, promise of restitution. Landa described witnessing such a ceremony in Izamal, where a man who had falsely accused his neighbor of theft stood on a platform and confessed his lie before the assembled town. He wept, and his voice carried across the plaza, Landa wrote. And when he finished, the man he had wronged embraced him, and they drank together, and the people sang, for disorder had become order again. And so we emerge from the sacred jungles of the Yucatan, where justice was written in stone and sealed with ritual. The Maya, architects of stars and time, ruled their cities not only through wisdom and worship, but through fear. From the ball courts where losers met their gods, to the steep steps of temples rising toward eternity, punishment was both spectacle and offering. As the Mayan proverb whispers, "He who lies to the gods, lies to himself, and loses twice." I said, "Their world has long vanished beneath the vines, yet their echoes remain a reminder that every civilization balances creation with cruelty. Thank you for journeying through the shadows of the ancient Maya. Until our next discovery,